Welcome, Bronco Nation, to a very special video today. It's the bye week for Boise State, a chance for all of us to catch our breath after what has been an interesting season so far, and it's only halfway through with a lot more to go. Today, we've got Ron Counts on today, and we're going to be looking at what's happened so far this year and what we think may end up happening the rest of the season out. We'll talk about the schedule so far, how Boise State has performed statistically, what Boise State's been able to put up, some top players that have stood out to us, how the new offense has looked, and our thoughts on that. And then we'll look at potentially how this season may end up turning out for Boise State. What's the rest of the schedule going to look like? What is the potential ceiling for this team? What's potentially the bottom level? Where are we expecting this team to go from here? What's some potential bowl landing spots? And we're going to end all of it with probably the topic that's on most people's minds, Andy Avalos. And so we're just going to launch right into it. Ron Counts is back with us today. He returned from a nice little sabbatical, taking care of his brand new baby, and everything is going great with that. He's had a chance to sit on the sidelines a little bit and observe the football, kind of a nice little break for him from his usual busy in the midst of it job. And now he's back into the heat. He came back in last week prior to the Colorado State game. Kind of a tough point to jump back in the season. And he jumped in feet running with Idaho Statesman. So make sure you check him out on all of his social media platforms. I'll post all of the pictures to all of those right here. And also you can check him out in the bio as well as video. But Ron, thanks for coming on the video today. And what's kind of been your perspective so far in the season?
You know, it has been really nice kind of getting to sit back and just watch and kind of sit back in the sidelines and lurk, if you will, and not have to jump in. But you know, I'll say this about this season. There were some things that were easy to anticipate, right? We knew Ashton Jeanty was going to be good. You know how good of a wide receiver Eric McAllister is. We knew the defense was going to struggle. I mean, you can't lose players like J.L. Skinner and Scott Matlock and not struggle the next year. You just can't. We knew all those things were going to happen. The one thing I did not expect this year at all was a quarterback controversy. That was the last thing on my mind. I mean, you've got a generational athlete in Taylon Green, who, granted, not the best passer, but an amazing athlete, always the best athlete on the field. And then you got Maddox Madsen, who's about 4 or 5 feet shorter, but has a much better arm, much more technical thrower. I personally, I know we'll talk about this more later, but I personally am not a fan of 2 quarterback systems. I go with the old John Madden mold. If you have 2 quarterbacks, you really have none. I'm not a fan of that at all. So that quarterback controversy has been a huge shock to me. Certainly no one saw the Colorado State loss coming. The Colorado State just defied the odds in that game. I mean, how many times does the team recover an onside kick and hit a Hail Mary in a span of 3 minutes? It just never happened. So I think that was a one-off, to be honest with you. I don't think that game tells the story of the season. There are other things that tell the story of the season for sure. You look at that UCF game where UCF did its best to give the game away to Boise State. They turned the ball over in their own red zone 3 times, I believe it was. Boise State still couldn't win that game. So it's just, I think there's been some up and downs. There's still some promise to be had, but that quarterback controversy shocked the heck out of me.
Well, Boise State sitting at 3-4, like you said, they have been really close in some of these games, like that UCF game where UCF really did do their best job to try and give Boise State that win. They weren't able to get it. And then, they come and lose a game where they were way ahead, like versus Colorado State, up by 21 points, up by 20 points, up 30-10 with 5 minutes left, and they end up losing that game. Absolutely shocking ending. Boise State is now sitting at 3-4. Andy Avalos has made the point of saying that they're only 6 points away from being 6-1, but the end of the result is that they're sitting at 3-4. Has this team accomplished what they were capable of this season? I mean, 3-4 is tough, but they've also had a really tough non-conference schedule. Where have they landed on the expectations barometer test for this team coming into the season?
I think that depends on who you are. I mean, if you're a fan of the Boise State Broncos who still remembers the Kellen Moore era, certainly they haven't come anywhere close to meeting your expectations. I mean, in that era, you expected undefeated seasons, you expected New Year's 6 bowl games. That's just not what this program is right now. Andy Avalos keeps talking about it. They're a developmental program. You don't say you're a developmental program unless you're having to develop something. They've got to fix the recruiting. The cupboard was pretty bare when Avalos got here. They've done some good recruiting. All those recruits haven't panned out yet, but they're building them there. So in terms of your expectations, If you're a fan, no. Now, if you're someone who knows football, if you're someone who's inside that locker room, maybe they've come a little bit closer to your expectations. The expectation of Boise State is always a Mountain West championship. That's always going to be the number one goal. So that is yet to be seen. Now, could they have won a few more games? Absolutely. And Andy was right. They are 6 points off from being 6-1. But you look at that, that says a lot about coaching right there, because a coach has got to be able to bring that out of his players. A coach has got to instill the mentality in his players to close out those winning games, to find a way to win those close games. So expectations, have they been met? Absolutely not. This is Boise State. They've got to win some more. They've got to get some more gold, some more trophies in that trophy case.
Statistically for this team, I think fans and analysts were expecting much more of a run focus for the program coming into the season. And then they opened up versus Washington throwing the ball, and they seem to have continued to try and hammer that point in. So far in the season, 1,642 yards passing, averaging 234.6 yards per game. It's almost 40 yards more than the average last season. They're on track. They're just about 1,000 yards short halfway through the year of eclipsing last year's passing numbers. While rushing-wise, they're sitting at 1,336 yards rushing and 190.9 yards rushing per game. Have you been surprised, and we'll talk a little bit about here in a second with the Bush Hampton offense and some of the approaches to that, but just overall with this team, have you been surprised by the focus in the passing game so far this season?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at the talent they have in the backfield in Taylon Green, Ashton Jeanty, George Holani, who I know has been injured, and then you bring in the Breezy Dubar. I mean, that is talent that, these guys should be averaging 40 rushing attempts a game, and they're just not. And it's, it's unfortunate. And it's not, it doesn't mean that Bush doesn't know what he's doing. It's just that sometimes as a coach, you outsmart yourself. Right? Everyone knows what Taylon Green put on film last year. Everyone knows that they're going to try and take away the running game this year. So now Bush is maybe trying to get a little too cute. He's trying to get a little too creative. Sometimes you just got to lean into what your players do well. That's simply put. What did Dirk Cutter do to save the season last year? He did exactly that. He simplified the offense. He leaned on the running game. He leaned on the offensive line. He leaned on his athletic quarterback. Sometimes, football doesn't have to be an overly complicated game. Sometimes you just got the better dudes out there. When you got the better dudes, you feed those dudes. That hasn't happened this year, and that's part of the problem. Losing George Holani to an injury hurt. And, a side note there is maybe they shouldn't have put him at punt return, because he's a pretty valuable piece of that offense to be returning punts. But that's just my opinion there. But they need to get back to leaning on that running game. I don't care if Holani's there or not. Ashton Jeanty is one of, if not the best running back in the country. John Breeze Dubar has come in and does not look like a freshman. He is big, physical, runs with purpose. They still need to be averaging close to 40 rushing attempts a game. That's where the strength of this offense is. That's what they got to do moving forward.
I absolutely agree, and we'll talk about that here in a second with point number 2. But before we get to that, one last statistical thing to look at overall this season is defensively for Boise State. It has not been an easy road. You talked about losses at key positions defensively, especially in the secondary, which was absolutely devastating. Losses at key positions at starting corner, at nickel, at free safety, and at safety. So pretty much across the entire board, you lost guys. But Boise State has really struggled. Last season, they gave up less than 200 yards per game passing. This season, they are over 300 yards per game passing allowed. The rushing numbers are about the same, about 124 yards. But teams have really dialed in. That Washington game kind of fired off a starting pistol, I think, and opposing teams noticed those holes and have gone after them aggressively. Have you been, yes, there were going to be changes and issues with new guys coming in, but have you been surprised by the almost complete meltdown in the secondary for Boise State this season?
I've been surprised in a sense, because Andy Avalos is such a defensive coach and Spencer Danielson's such a good coach. I really thought they'd have them a little bit more prepared. Now, I want to go back to your first point, mentioning the Washington game. We have to be careful using that as a barometer for this season, because Washington is one of the best teams in the country. They're top 10 for a reason. They have maybe the best group of wide receivers in the entire country. So I think you got to take that game. You got to throw it out the window. Now, that being said, I'm not excusing what the defense has done. Their struggles this year have been giving up big plays, especially passing plays of more than 15 yards. So how about this for a stat? Last season, in 12 regular season games, they only gave up 35 passing plays of 15 yards or more. This year, just against Washington and UCF, combined, they gave up 26 passing plays of more than 15 yards. They've almost doubled how many they've given up from last year. So again, don't think too much about Washington, but think about those rest of those games. Think about the Colorado State game. They held Torrey Horton in relatively control for the whole first half. Then in the second half, when it mattered, he broke loose. He's hitting 40-yard passes. He's the one that set up the Hail Mary pass. So giving up those big plays has been a huge problem. And you're right, the secondary is in rebuilding mode. You lose a J.L. Skinner, a Tyreek Jones, a Caleb Biggers. That's a lot of starts. That's a lot of experience to replace. So they've got some young guys that are trying to fill those shoes. They're definitely feeling some growing pains. They're maybe not there on the outsides. I'm not sure their corners are quite up to par this year to play enough man-to-man defense that they want to play. But at the same time, giving up those big plays is not just on the secondary. It's also on the pass rush. The pass rush has completely disappeared. I believe they only have 14 or 15 sacks on the season. Ahmed Hassanin leads the team with 5 sacks. So when you're not getting pressure on the quarterback and he has time to sit back there and pick the defense apart, any quarterback can make a secondary look bad. So the front end and the back end of that defense have got to start working together. They got to find ways to produce more pressure, and they got to do a better job covering those receivers. It's just plain and simple.
Well, as you alluded to earlier, it's not just been the issues on defense and the secondary that have hurt Boise State. It's been the offensive struggles and specifically the 2-quarterback system that has come and been run. Bush Henry's offense, we've kind of seen a transformation from the beginning of the season where they come out versus Washington. And maybe like you're saying, trying to outsmart themselves maybe a little bit too much. And they emphasize the passing game a little bit too much in that one. And then they kind of dialed things back and came with a little bit more of a balanced approach. And then suddenly they're starting at the end of games to start putting in Maddox Madsen, who I think earlier you said he was 4 to 5 feet smaller. He definitely seems like that sometimes on the field. It's inches, but sometimes it seems like that when you do the rotation. Taylor Green's sitting at 6'7", I believe, and then Maddox Madsen he's my height. They say 5'10", but I was standing next to him, and he's my height, and I'm 5'9.5". So he's on the lower end of 5'10" for sure. So you have, like you said, probably one of the most impressive athletic specimens to ever come to Boise State. And then you've got this kid who's just got probably one of the biggest hearts I've ever seen in college football. The way that he comes in crucial situations versus UCF, versus Memphis, and in those 2 games, in key situations, performs flawlessly. I mean, no picks, nothing. In those 2 games, besides, at least in the crunch time, he had 1 pick versus Memphis, but it was early on. He comes in and he plays in such a huge environment. And the coaches look at that and they go, maybe we should start giving more playing time. And it has developed into this Frankenstein offense we've seen the last 2 games versus San Jose State and Colorado State of the 2-quarterback system. I want you to talk a little bit more about that and maybe the reasoning that Boise State has gone to that, because, again, that's not something that any of us expected coming into this season. And it's definitely something that's caused a lot of fans to express displeasure with the direction of Boise State football right now.
Well, when you look at the reason, it's simple. Maddox Madsen is a good quarterback. I'm a big Mad Dog fan. And look, here's the reality. Boise State was built on athletes just like Maddox Madsen. I mean, Maddox Madsen basically is Kellen Moore. Neither one of them are overly athletic. Neither one of them were really highly touted recruits, but both of them are accurate. Both of them understand timing. Both of them are really smart. I really enjoy Maddox Madsen. But the thing that is a killer to any offense is indecisiveness, whether it's coming from the coaches or the players. And the thing about this, let's start with the coaches. So they know they've got 2 solid quarterbacks, right? Taylor Green, heck of an athlete, maybe not the most polished passer, but one of the best athletes on the field every single game. Maddox Madsen, much more polished passer. They know they've got 2 guys, but they just can't. They here's the problem. And just to be frank with you guys, they didn't have the guts to name a starter. That is the whole deal right there. Everyone knows what kind of talent Taylor Green is, including people outside of Boise. So the coaches were worried if they didn't play Taylor, if they benched Taylor, someone else is going to swoop in. He's going to transfer. He's going to end up somewhere in Texas, blah, blah, blah. So they didn't have the guts to say, Taylor, you're great, but Maddox gives us the better chance to win. They simply didn't. So now they're trying to hodgepodge this thing together. They're trying to make changes on individual drives in the quarterback. That just doesn't work long term. Yeah, you might beat San Jose State doing that, but you're not going to string together 4, 5, 6 wins doing that, because it's just so tough. The reason 2 quarterback systems don't work that often is that they make the offense predictable. When Taylor Green's in the game, more than often not, he's going to run the ball. Maddox Madsen's going to throw the ball. And it's also it's really tough on the rest of the offense. Quarterbacks have different cadences. They have different timings. The offensive line has got to understand that stuff. So This system is just not built to be sustainable. Yes, you can win some games, but you're not going to win championships like this. You've got to find a way to summon up some guts and name that starter. If it's Talon Green, you stick with Talon and you tailor your offense to what Talon does well. That means using his legs, that means design runs, and that means play action to open up the passing game. If you're going to go with Maddox, go with Maddox. Play a traditional offense, play your quick, West Coast timing passing routes. You can do that, but you've got to make a decision. Riding the fence leads to nothing but losses long term.
And it's especially hard when you are going with Talon Green as the main guy who's your running quarterback, and then you are bringing in as your positional player the passing quarterback. That absolutely doesn't make any sense at all. If you ever see the system in any form of working order, it's where the passing quarterback is on the field for the majority of the drives, like we had Brett Rippon and Montel Cozart. Brett Rippon, the passing quarterback's on the field, then you bring in the running quarterback for kind of a third and short situation. And that's the only way this system has ever been seen to work. This Frankenstein offense is very, very concerning to watch. You mentioned something that I wanted to kind of talk about. You talked about how if they're going to go with Talon Green, they have to mold the offense to him. Mm-hmm. And that's what I've said in my videos is I've said Talon Green is not a bad quarterback, and Bush Hampton is not a bad offensive coordinator. It's just that the offensive system that Bush Hampton is running is not made for Talon Green. It's made for a pocket passing style quarterback like Maddox Madsen. But it's not like Talon Green was kind of some hidden commodity that was like some fresh recruit that they threw into the system and they didn't know what he brought to the table. They saw who he was last season. They know what he is. And Bush Hampton was brought in specifically to help Talon Green and to build an offensive system around Talon Green. So I'm just confused at this point why Boise State did not mold their offense to him. Do you have any kind of perspective at all on that?
I don't. I honestly don't. I mean, you look at what Dirk Cutter did last year, you would think that would be the blueprint. But again, I just think it's Bush outsmarting himself. I think it's Bush trying to force Talon to be a different guy than he is. I mean, I asked Bush Hampton this question just last week, how do you balance teaching a guy like Talon how to play quarterback versus preserving his confidence? Because that's the problem right now. With Talon being told constantly, you're not a great passer, you need to do this better, you need to do that better, his confidence is being dinged every play. Every time he's taken off the field, his confidence is being dinged. He might not show that, but it's happening. And confidence is a huge part of playing quarterback, or playing any position really, but especially quarterback. Because if you're not confident in what you're doing, you're overthinking, and then you're a step slow. And when you're a step slow at quarterback, you throw interceptions, you miss open passers. So I think that they've got Talon Green in his head too much. I think they've got to go back to the Dirk Cutter mold and simplify this thing. Design, Talon needs to be running the ball 7, 8, 9, maybe even 10 times a game. Designed runs. That's his game. I mean, you don't take what a dude does best away and ask him to still be a dude. You just don't. No one's going to take Michael Jordan's fadeaway away and ask him to be Michael Jordan. Like you don't do that. You don't do that. It doesn't matter if it's high school football, college football, or the NFL. You tailor your scheme to what your players do well, not the other way around. You can't fit a square peg into a round hole. It just doesn't work. Talon runs the ball well. Maddox throws the ball well. So bottom line, they've got to decide what kind of offense they want to be. And then they've got to have the guts to name that starter, plain and simple.
Prior to the UTEP game last season, it came out that part of the reason that Tim Plow's offense was so choppy and changing kind of every week and just not flowing was that he wasn't being given 100% control over the offense, that Andy Avalos was asking him to do some things that was not his original ideas, that he was trying to mold his offense to meet with Andy Avalos's dreams and goals and vision for the team. Mm-hmm. How much, specifically maybe the two quarterback system, but other aspects of Bush Hampton's offense, not molding directly to Talon Green, coming in with this more balanced attack, how much of this do you think is Bush Hampton, and how much of this do you think is potentially Andy Avalos being involved in the offensive scheme?
I think it's a combination. I mean, I'll say this in his press conference just yesterday, Andy said that he's going to trust Bush. He's going to trust what Bush's plan is, but he wants to know the plan. He wants to be involved in the plan. So how involved is he? I don't know. I'm not there in the meetings and things like that. It's possible that Andy has has his hands in the pot a little bit too much, but Andy's a defensive guy. So it makes much more sense for Andy to be hands-on the defensive side of the ball and let Bush do his things on the offensive side of the ball. But I just really can't answer that question with any kind of certainty because we just don't know. We don't know. We can assume, we can guess, we can hypothesize what Andy's doing behind the scenes, but we can never know. What we do know is that as a staff, all those coaches collectively, they didn't have the guts to name a starter, and it's going to come back to bite them.
Well, despite not naming a starter on offense and having some issues with the team the last couple of games and really throughout the season, Boise State has still produced some standout players this year. And while this video, I think, because at this point in the season, Boise State's 3-4 and headed in a negative direction, and we're going to talk about that potentially here in the second half of the video, this video overall has a somewhat negative context to it. I want us to focus on some positives as well. I always love to flesh out both of those. So in a purely positive sense, who has stood out to you on offense and defense this season? I know that was a highlight of our 10-10 series. We looked at guys that have transferred in. We looked at potential guys that would replace some of those big losses that we had. Who has come in and done that for you this season on offense and defense? Who's been a standout or standouts for you on both those programs? And special teams too.
Offensively, we got to start with Ashton Jeanty. We saw what he could do last year, and he's just taking it to another level this year. That kid is simply untackleable. I don't even know if that's a word, but I'm going to coin it. He is untackleable sometimes when he touches the ball. He's elusive. He's strong. He can hurdle dudes. He's got good hands out of the backfield. He's a future NFL running back for sure. You can look at the body type and tell that, but the film doesn't lie. He leads the team with 868 rushing yards. He leads the nation with 15 total touchdowns. He leads the nation with 604 yards after contact. And that just shows how hard he is to tackle. He plays with great leverage, great vision, great instincts, amazing player. One of, if not the best running back in the country. Absolutely. Beyond that, Eric McAllister, the wide receiver. Again, we saw what he can do last year. He's a big-bodied kid, 6'3", $180, maybe $190. Really, this year has shown that knack for going and winning that 50-50 ball. And here's the thing. We talked about how Talon's not the most polished passer. One of the worst things Talon does over and over again is throw into coverage. Almost every game he's throwing into double coverage, into triple coverage. But a guy like Eric McAllister can kind of hide some of those deficiencies because he can go up and take that ball. He's big. He's physical. He just knows how to win those. He's got a basketball background. He uses that to box out defenders. He's a really good receiver. Now, we'd love for a couple other receivers to really step up this year, but right now it's just the Eric McAllister show, and he's done a great job. Let me go to the offensive line real quick because I think that unit has been by far the most improved unit on the field this year. Those guys have been blocking their butts off. They've been playing awesome this year, even though they've had some injury concerns. The first 3 games of the season, my favorite duo to watch was Garrett Curran and Ben Dooley blocking next to each other. Because when those two dudes get on a combo block, they finish it. And they finish it with power. They finish it with nasty. I really like those two guys. Mason Randolph's a really solid interior lineman. Cage Casey and Cade Beresford have done a good job on the outside. So that O-line has played really, really well this year. Now let's switch over to defense. It's tough defensively because they've given up so many yards. But there's one guy that has come in and really shined. He's really been a shining beacon for the defense, and that's Marco Notriani. This young man is a man's man, old school, hard-nosed linebacker. He plays downhill. He's got great instincts, leads the team in tackles. And remember this, he didn't even expect to start this year. DJ Schramm was supposed to be the starter. He's been out injured. Marco's played a really, really great year. He's had an awesome season. Another guy that's really impressed me, who I thought was going to come on this year, Ahmed Hassanin, freak of an athlete. We're talking about a kid who was nationally ranked in CrossFit at almost 300 pounds. He has that natural ability. He's playing more of the stand-up edge position this year versus the traditional end, and he's got those pass rush abilities. He's got the skills. He just had to hone those abilities, and he has team-leading 5 sacks, so he's played really well. And then you go to the secondary. If there's one guy that's really stood out in the secondary to me this year, it's Marion McCoy, the JUCO cornerback. He's got an edge to him. He plays with confidence. He's got great ball skills. We saw that in the spring. He had a big interception just a couple weeks ago against San Jose State. So he's a guy who I think is going to be really good for them a couple years down the road.
I love all the guys that you called out, especially in the defense, because anybody that watched the videos we did together or read your articles, you were ahead of the curve on all these guys defensively. Maybe not Ronnie's a surprise to all of us, but you were talking about Ahmed Hassanin. You wrote a special on him and talking about his family and how they've come in behind the sword. You were talking about Amari McCoy as one of your top guys, transfers that you thought would come in and have an immediate impact right away. And I've circled both those guys. Ahmed Hassanin leading the team with 5 sacks, also has a forced fumble. Martin McCoy has just exploded. His family and his supportive staff that he has around him are also just really, really vibrant personalities and really add a lot to the fan base as well. So, yeah, 15 tackles, 3 passes defended, an interception. He's really come in and strengthened that secondary that's really needed it. And maybe as he develops, Boise State in the back end of the season might have some more success. Also, another corner, I've been impressed with Jalen Clark. He leads the team in 5 passes defended. Yes, he's also been beat on some plays, but I think it's also because they're kind of lining him up with some of their best guys out there receiver-wise. And so he's had to real struggle, but he's also come up with 5 passes defended, interception, lead the team. Marco Nonarani, like you said, you kind of covered that one. He has been incredible, leads the team with 52 tackles. My guy, Shea Oladipo, who I was really hyped about the season, has not disappointed. He has been a force for Boise State there in the nickel position, playing as well as I expected him to. 27 tackles, wrong stat. 29 tackles, 3 passes defended. While the rest of the team has struggled in some elements and some of that open field tackling, Shea Oladipo overall has not. He has been a lockdown guy that has come in, made tackles for loss. He's been a huge player for Boise State, had some 4th down stops. So with the defensive guys you highlighted, definitely 100% agree with. And offensively, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Ashton Jeanty right now is 2nd overall in the NCAA in rushing yards and 90th overall in the NCAA in receiving yards as a running back. He is the only running back in NCAA football to be in the top 100 in receiving yards this season so far. He's the NCAA leader in all-purpose yards, not counting kick returns. He is probably on track to be one of the greatest running backs of all time at Boise State, assuming that he stays at Boise State. And that is something that is going to be an end-of-season discussion point. But, yeah, he is having an amazing season. And just to wrap up here offensively, Eric McAllister, like you mentioned, 628 yards receiving so far this season. Last year, all season long, all 12-plus games that Boise State played, 549 yards was the most yards by a wide receiver. Joe Caples, who obviously is out right now due to injury. In 6 games, Eric McAllister has already gotten almost 100 more than that number and has another season, the whole rest of the season to finish, and is going to continue to be a focal point for this offense. So I agree 100% offensive, defensive players. And that's kind of part of the reason that the season is disappointing so far is because you see these standouts, especially offensively. You see a guy like Ashton Jeanty have a 200-plus yard game versus Colorado State, and we still lose. You see special teams. I mean, Boise State special teams performance, at least from the 2 key positions, kicking and punting, has been the most impressive I've ever seen all time by a combination at that position. Jonah Dalmez right now is only 3 kicks short of breaking Kyle Brossman's record. He has the longest career field goal in Boise State history right now with a 56-yarder, which Kyle Brossman has a 67-yarder. That's hard to beat. But 2nd longest all-time for Boise State. He's 9 of 11 so far. And James Ferguson Reynolds is putting together one of the most impressive seasons I have ever seen by a punter, not just Boise State punter, all time. I mean, he, so far this season, is averaging 49.5 yards per punt. He is 5 out of the 7 games has averaged 50-plus yards, and he had a long of 71, which tied Joel Velasquez's long of 71 in the last 10 years. So far, if you want to know the record numbers for Boise State, the single season record for a single season is 45.8 yards, Kyle Brossman. Well, right now this season, James Ferguson Reynolds has 49.5 yard average. If he continues at this pace, he will have the most yards average ever by a Boise State punter in school history. He already right now is 2nd all time in single game punting with a minimum of 5 punts at least, with his 52.1 yard average versus University of Washington when he kicked 7 punts, and still averaged over 50 yards a punt. So you have this incredible roster. Yes, there's deficiencies that need to be addressed in defense, and we're part of what we knew coming into the season. But you have these incredible players, and yet Boise State sits at 3-4 and is now having to face Wyoming, Fresno State, New Mexico, Utah State, and Air Force, and 3 of those teams have 5 wins or more. 2 of those teams have been ranked so far this season. Air Force right now at number 22 and undefeated. Fresno State at 6-1. And you look at the rest of the season, you go, is Boise State going to get to bowl eligibility? What is your perspective on the rest of the season here for Boise State?
It's going to be a coin flip. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. The rest of this schedule is tough, man. We talked about how tough their non-con schedule was. You look at the back half of this season this year, Wyoming is a gamer. You know, I didn't think they were going to be as good as they are, but they took Air Force to the wire last week. Same thing with Utah State. I mean, Utah State might be the surprise of the conference right now. I know UNLV is having a really good season, but Utah State almost beat Fresno State last week. They were a touchdown off from beating them. So I think Boise State, you know, realistically, I say they lose 2 of those games. You know, just being realistic. You know, I think playing Air Force last game of the season is going to be really tough. Fresno's always tough. Wyoming always plays them tough. You know, I'm just not sure they go unscathed through that. So, and then think about this. Say they do go, you know, undefeated through those 4 games, then they're probably going to have to play Air Force in back-to-back weeks in the championship game. It's just, I mean, this is a brutal stretch for them. So they've got to find a way to get it together. Again, they got to find a way to fix that offense, fix the quarterback system, because if they don't get those quarterbacks right, they're not going to win any of those games, you know, other than New Mexico. Let's be real. They're going to beat New Mexico. but Wyoming, Fresno State, Utah State, Air Force, they're all going to be coin flips especially if the quarterback is not fixed.
And Boise State right now is looking at the possibility of ending the season 4-8. The potential possibility, like you said, Fresno State, Wyoming, Air Force, those 3 are not trending Boise State's way. Hopefully,
this city will melt down if that happens. If they finish the season 4-8, this city will melt down. I think Twitter or X, whatever it's called now, it'll crash. It'll be like, you know, catastrophe. You know, it'll be the end of times.
It's 1997 was the last time that Boise State had a record similar, and 4-7 their second year in the FBS, and every year after that they've won at least 6 or more games, and most of those years they were in the 10+ win column. It is going to be one heck of a ride to watch the rest of the season. You definitely came back at an interesting point. What do you see as the ceiling for this team, and what, as far as, you know, end of season potential record and potential bowl landing spots? And what do you see as the likely end of season? So they're their top level potential and their most likely ending spot. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, I see another 7-5 season coming here. I mean, 7-5 regular season. You know, if they lose two of the remaining games, they're not going to be in the Mountain West Championship game. They'll still be bowl eligible. You know, I can see them getting a low to mid-tier bowl game, maybe the Arizona Bowl. Maybe this is the year they stay home playing the Potato Bowl. You know, they draw such a good crowd that ESPN is going to want them in one of their bowls. So maybe they'll be back in Texas for the Frisco Bowl or one of those ESPN-sponsored bowl. But honestly, right now, I don't see them finishing better than 7-5. I think they find a way to beat Wyoming because they just always seem to rise to the occasion against Wyoming. But I think Fresno State gets them. I think there's going to be a chance that Utah State gets them. And then I think Air Force beats them, especially if Air Force's starting quarterback comes back healthy for that last game. I'm just not sure that this defense is disciplined enough to slow down that triple option. So I think they lose to Fresno State, they lose to Air Force, and then Utah State is a coin toss. So if you're 7-5, you're getting a low-end bowl game. Like I said, Arizona Bowl, Frisco Bowl, something. You're probably not even Frisco Bowl, to be honest, but one of those lower-end, lower-tier bowl games this season.
Well, that would actually be 6-6 if they did that schedule that you just said. They're 3-4 right now, and if they won those 3, so 6-6.
Math is not my strong suit.
It's all good. I mean, I have the benefit of having it down here and writing and doing the calculations when you do it. 7-5 would actually, I think, be a huge win for this team based on where they started, because they would have to go 4-5 the rest of the way to get to that point. 6-6, I mean, for me, at least from my perspective, and I want to save, good 5-7 minutes to end the video to talk about something important here, but 6-6 is probably what I am hoping for as a fan. 6-6 for me is, 3 out of 5 those last games, pulling off an upset of one of the big 3, Wyoming, Fresno State, Air Force, is what is my at this point is my maximum ceiling I see for this team. If I'm calling it right now, I'm thinking they go 5-7. I think that they miss out on bowl eligibility for the first time since 1997. That was the last time that Boise State did not get to bowl eligibility. With that perspective as a potential, Andy Avalos, our last talking point, and we're going to spend the last, we got like 8-10 minutes here. So the last talking point here, Andy Avalos. In our preview of the season, our last point of our 10-10 series was Andy Avalos. Where is he? Is he on the hot seat? What are the expectations for him this season? What is he able to achieve? What, all of that. And you had some interesting thoughts on that. I was kind of leaning more towards he's probably on the hot seat. You said something unexpected would have to happen for him to be on the hot seat. You said it's not even warm. You said even if Boise State only won 3 games this season, he would still be back next year. And currently, Boise State's sitting at 3-4. So, what is your perspective on that now? Has it changed? Is he on the hot seat? And do you see him there potentially being a coaching change, if not through this season, by the end of the year?
I think his seat is warm. I think if they go 5-7, like you say, and miss bowl eligibility, that seat definitely gets hot. But I don't think he's fired at the end of this season. I still say his job is not in jeopardy right now. He's got 2 years left on his contract. Former Boise State player. His players love him. The administration love him. I know the fans are down on him right now. I get that. Listen, a coach is measured by wins and losses. And Andy Avalos is 20-13 right now. And yeah, he's had to overcome adversity every season. You look at 2021, they're 3-4 going into the bye week, just like they were this year. Last year, they're 2-2 after that loss to UTEP. He has to fire his OC. So he's had to overcome a lot, but he did overcome it last year. They finished the season strong. They went 10-4. I just think in this town, Andy Avalos is still safe. And here's part of the reason I say that, because next year's the goal. 2024, when the CFP expands, that's when you want your house to be tight. That's when you want everything to be in order. You want your players to be right, your scheme to be right. You don't want to be breaking in a new coaching staff and trying to make that to get that CFP playoff spot. I just don't think the timing is going to fit there. Now, if a year from now we're talking about Boise State might be 5-7 in 2024, then yeah, Andy's gone. He's fired. He's looking for his next gig. But I think this time, right now, in this town, he's safe. If this was, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, if this was Tallahassee, Florida, if this was Columbus, Ohio, different story. That coach is in trouble. But Andy Avalos is part of the brotherhood here. He loves that term. He's part of the brotherhood. He's part of the family. Jeremiah Dickey loves him. His players love him. I think he's going to get at least one more year to prove what he can do. And remember, the cupboard was bare when he got here. I know Brian Harsin did a lot of great stuff. Brian Harsin won a lot of games. Brian Harsin did not do Andy any favors in terms of recruiting. That cupboard was bare, especially on the offensive and defensive line, especially in the wide receiver room. It was bare. So he had to rebuild this thing basically from scratch. So he's going to get a full 3 years to prove what he can do. That 4th year is going to be the make it or break it year. So I just think this year he's safe. Next year, maybe not so much.
Make it or break it. In light of this season, we talked about in our 10-10 that the expectation at Boise State is not just 10 wins, but a Mountain West championship and at least in contention for something more. In light of this season, say he exceeds all expectations throughout the rest of the year, gets to somewhere between 6-6, 7-5. Bowl eligibility, Boise State gets to a bowl game, they're competitive in it, probably win it. Okay, so he's somewhere between 7 and 6 or 8 and 4, somewhere in that. Well, I'm not doing my math right, but you know what I'm saying. 7-5 in the regular season, 6-6 with a bowl win. Yeah. Say he does that in this year, he keeps his job, he goes into next season, the prove it year, the year 4, the point where everything's changed in college football. You're not just playing for, some side dishes at the table. You're playing for the main thing. You are in contention as a group of 5 program for a playoff spot. It's there. That is where we're moving college football. What does he have to do next season, assuming he gets through this one, to secure his job and not have Boise State at a point where they're either saying, all right, at the end of your contract, we're going to go other directions, or we're going to terminate a year early and move to somewhere else? What do they have to do? What does he have to do?
Number one, he's got to take control. He's got to be decisive. Again, we're not privy to all the inside conversations in the locker room, in the meeting rooms, things like that. But the head coach is the face of the program. He's got to make the decisions. He's got to be the guy that says, hey, this is my starting quarterback. This is my scheme. This is my defense. He can't just delegate everything. So he's got to do that. And then in terms of wins or losses, he's got to get to that playoff spot. He's got to be in contention at the end of the season for the Mountain West Championship, because if he wins that Mountain West title, he's more than likely going to get that 6th spot. So that's what it's going to take next year. Him making the decision that this is his program, it's going to be the program is going to reflect him, and proving it on the field, being in contention at the end of the year and getting that playoff spot.
I 100% agree with you on the fact that's what he's got to do in 2024. I'm not necessarily on the same page that he'll still be here in 2024, and my next video is going to talk a little bit more about that. But if he is, I absolutely agree. That's where we've got to go for the program to say we are in a place where your job is safe. We're going to extend and we're going to move forward. That I absolutely believe that, yeah, we have to be in the top 25. We have to win the Mountain West, and we have to be one of those teams that is looking at a 10-win season and is being discussed about, if we miss out on the playoffs, but he did everything to put us there, fine. But sure, that's where we have to go. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I absolutely hope that that's where we go. It is going to be an interesting end of the season. Boise State, it feels, I think a lot of fans right now feel like the season's over because of how it started. And it's not. It 100% is not. Boise State's goal at the beginning and end of every season is to get to a Mountain West championship game, win the Mountain West, and get to a bowl game. That's their goal. That's on their briefing room board at the top of their briefing wall. That's what it says. And that is still completely achievable. Bowl game, 100% achievable. Yes, they're going to have to beat some teams where they are now the underdog. They are the ones with a chip on the shoulder coming in, not favored. All the analysis and hype is about the other team. That's a position Boise State hasn't been in a while. But if they win out through the rest of the season, they will be in the Mountain West Championship game. They have one loss, but they'll have beaten everybody head-to-head. They will be in a Mountain West Championship game at the end of the season. Colorado State is not going to get to a Mountain West Championship game, so you don't have to worry about the head-to-head loss versus them. You win out, you're there. So they still control their own destiny. The season's not over. It's regardless of what happens, it's going to be an interesting ride the rest of the way, and we're going to see the foundation set for what Boise State can build on in the future. So I'm excited to see what happens. I'm so happy we were able to do this because the 10-10 series, the preview series was fantastic. And this really allowed us to kind of look back on how some of those projections went and where Boise State might be going now into the future of this season and beyond. So thank you so much, as always, Ron, for coming on. You bring a great perspective. And everybody, make sure that you are following Ron on his social media. Make sure that you are reading his incredible articles. So glad to have you back here with the Idaho Statesman and throughout the rest of the season, have your content to read. So thanks so much for coming on today. Thanks so much for the work that you do. And thank you, Bronco Nation, for being with us today in this exciting discussion. We want to hear all of your comments in the comments below. Give us your thoughts and your perspective on the discussion we had today and where you think Boise State is going to go. I'll definitely read all of those and try to reply as many as I can. So thank you so much for being here, Ron. Thank you so much for being here, Bronco Nation. And as always, win or lose, no matter how the season ends, go Big Blue!